It's a pleasure to be here with Rabbi Sheldon Lewis, here to discuss his book, Letters Home, a Jewish Chaplain's Vietnam Memoir. I always love these kind of books that show how truly significant a year or two, what's not so long in chronological time, but how influential it can be on somebody's life. This is, one of those type of books about his time in Vietnam. We're also joined today by Rabbi Irv Elson, the director of the JWB Jewish Chaplains Council, and our museum president, Michael Berman. So I want to hand it over to Mike to say a few words.
All right, thank you very much, Mike, for putting this together. And both rabbis, thank you very much for joining us. Just as a heads up, we do have another program on March 20th, which will be by Mark Wartman, who wrote a book about Admiral Hyman Rickover and his experiences with the Admiral. So we look forward to that. And with that, Rabbi, I'm handing it off to you.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. I can't tell you what a rare privilege this is to be here today, not only speaking in another great program in the museum, but in particular, being able to be here as Rabbi Lewis talks about his book. As you know, for over 104 years, not as old as Jewish war veterans, but getting there. JWB Jewish Chaplains Council has been providing a meaningful Jewish life for Jews in the military. And the first conduit that we use to do this is through our chaplains. And so it is really a great honor to be here and to listen to the words of Rabbi Lewis, in particular about his book. So I had a chance to read the book last Shabbos, and two things struck me in particular that really get to the root of what Jewish chaplaincy in the military is all about. The first thing that struck me was when Rabbi Lewis wrote about his decision, or how he came to his decision to go to Vietnam. As you know, in those days, rabbinical students were exempt from the draft, and yet the seminaries did ask for volunteers to go. And I particularly identified with the struggle that Rabbi Lewis had in making the decision to go. And I actually highlighted the quote in the book, which I want to read you now. He said that he decided to go to Vietnam because he said, "Yet how could I not feel responsible for brethren who were drafted?" And Rabbi Lewis, your sense of devotion, not only to the Jewish people, but to our country and to serving our people wherever they are, really struck a chord with me. You, as many of our rabbis, have made that hard choice. And I guess during the Vietnam War, the choice was even harder. And the second issue in the book that really struck a chord with me was your devotion to serving the needs of all Jews. And again, let me write, he said, "As a rabbi, I was welcome without anyone asserting their personal orientation that was unsuited for him or her. Everyone wanted to stand together, and so I made room for everyone." And I think that's the other hallmark of Jewish military chaplains, that they provide for our own, they facilitate for others, but they care for all. And your care was evident. And finally, I know you returned to Vietnam at a time when it wasn't popular, when the war wasn't popular. And so on this presentation, I want to be the first to say, Rabbi Lewis, welcome home, and thank you so much for your meaningful and long-lasting service. I'm going to do something unusual for a rabbi to do, and that is to quote the Christian scriptures, where in the book of Matthew it says, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Rabbi Lewis, you're a credit to us rabbis. You're certainly a credit to JWB and to the American people, and I can't wait to hear your words.
Well, that was great. Thanks, Rabbi Elson. Before we get to Rabbi Lewis, I just want to ask people to submit questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We'll get to those at the end. You can go ahead and start submitting them anytime, but we'll get to the questions after the presentation. And so, born in Chicago, Rabbi Shelley Lewis was educated at the University of Chicago and the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York City, where he was ordained as a rabbi. He was a student of Professor Abraham Joshua Heschel and was active in civil and human rights causes, especially the movement to free Soviet Jewry. For 33 years, he was the rabbi at Kol Emeth in Palo Alto before retiring in 2007 and is now Rabbi Emeritus. In 2012, he published a book on peaceful conflict resolution within Jewish sources entitled The Torah of Reconciliation. And that was the first of several books leading to his most recent, which is A Letters Home, a Jewish Chaplain's Vietnam Memoir. Rabbi Lewis, thanks for being here.
Mike, thank you. And thank you, Rabbi Elson and Michael. Michael Berman, I feel absolutely honored to receive this invitation. The whole treasury of memories from Vietnam were secluded really and not shared for these 50 years. And I suppose that one question that would arise for a reader of the book or someone who's here online today is, why did it take 50 years to write this, a whole half century? And the answer is actually pretty clear to me, and that is that when we returned, and I think this was a common experience of Vietnam vets, that there was no warm welcome from that war. I appreciate the welcome from Rabbi Elson now, and it's never too late. But at the time, there wasn't a warm welcome. No one really wanted to hear. And in my personal experience, that when I came into congregational life, I distinctly remember when I interviewed for my position in Palo Alto, that there was no question asked about my experience in Vietnam, even as formative as it was for me. And in my tenure in the congregation, it took me about 30 years before I felt somehow that it was appropriate to talk about my experience in Vietnam. And now, after 50 years, things have changed. I think there really has been a sea change culturally, and in which those who served in Vietnam, as in other wars, now are retrospectively treated with respect, even if the war is still judged as a terrible adventure and immoral, and a terrible waste. And there was one key moment that really got me going and was a catalyst for my beginning to write, and that happened on November 16th, 2020. There was online a reunion of a platoon in Charlie Company as part of the Miracle Division, because on that very day, 50 years, exactly 50 years before, while on patrol, 2 explosive devices were triggered from a hillside. The casualties were terrible. Two soldiers were killed, and there were others wounded. And among one of them, who was gravely wounded, Lloyd Cantor, who I know is with us today. I'm so grateful. He and his wife Loretta are with us today. He lost 4 limbs, an eye, and more. And he survived, thank God. And he and his wife were present as they and other comrades in the platoon, including Paul McClellan, Bill Frankovich, Furman, Cunard, platoon comrades, and Richard Gibbs were there to share their memories. Listening to them, it just seemed to me that it was really worthy to share these memories, not only of that event, but of so many more. And I could actually go out and feel comfortable wearing a hat from Vietnam, which I received from Lloyd and Loretta and my brother-in-law, Bruce Mayer, who was also a Marine, a Vietnam vet. I could wear a hat probably. And of course, how does one write after 50 years? Memories erode, certainly my memories erode, but I had a great resource, and that was the letters and audio tapes that I had written in exchange with my wife, Lori, who is online today too. Those letters we had kept them, but they had gathered dust for many years. Really hadn't looked at them for so long. They were my journal, and out of them I was able to write. I wanted to say just a word about the context in which my service took place, which Rabbi Elson actually certainly had alluded to. I was a student in New York in the Upper West Side, kind of a focal point of war protest. And as he mentioned, my primary mentor at the seminary was Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was a leader in the religious protests against the war, being a founder of Clergy and Layman Concern for Vietnam. And I was actually opposed to the war myself, and I took part in anti-war protests. I was actually present one day that has a very vivid memory for me. I was present at Riverside Church in New York on April 4th, 1967, when Martin Luther King and Heschel and others stood before a full house. And it was at that moment that Martin Luther King decided to become public in his protests for the war. It was something that stayed with me, and Heschel spoke, and it was an extremely emotional and powerful day. Yet with all that protest, the draft was on. Every young man had to register and receive a lottery number, and those whose numbers were lower enough were asked to serve, and many certainly were in uniform. There was tension at the seminaries. Clergy students were indeed exempt from the draft, not only deferred during their student years, but exempt, which is something that really troubled me then and troubles me now. But we were urged to volunteer because there was a great shortage. I knew that to enter the military, I would have to be silent about my own views about the war. But I did decide. The shortage was acute and the need was great, and our brethren were there, and so I did decide to volunteer. I didn't know, of course, that I would be sent to Vietnam. I knew it was obligated for 2 years of service. And before going to Vietnam, I was at Fort Lewis near Tacoma, Washington. And I could even actually experience the war from afar because it was a training base and it was a transit place where people would come from other training bases to be sent to Vietnam. I was, among other things, I served in, I would go to visit the brig at the fort where there were soldiers who struggled with their orders to go to Vietnam and were often trying to find a way out and to apply to become a conscientious objector, even in such an unlikely moment, being in uniform. And I was called to counsel them and to listen to them. And I still remember one night when I was on call at Fort Lewis that I was called to see a soldier who had arrived in transit to Vietnam with a bullet hole in his foot, and he was about to be sent without any medical attention, and it was a testimony to the deep feelings of regret and attempts to avoid to go to Vietnam. Then my orders came. It was a difficult personal moment for me. I had recently become engaged to a wonderful woman who's online, Lori, and we of course had different plans for the future, but we were married and we had 4 weeks before I departed. I remember distinctly at that time, and I bet many of you will remember that a very popular song at that time sung by Peter, Paul, and Mary was I'm leaving on a jet plane. I don't know when I'll be back again. It was the lyrics seemed written for us, as I'm sure for so many who were heading off to war, and a very unpopular war. My post was the Central Highlands in Vietnam. My office was in a place called Netrang on the coast, on the South China Sea. A beautiful place. If it were not wartime. There were 3 of us rabbis in the country in my area. There were approximately, we estimated about 500 Jewish personnel, mostly men. There were a couple of women who served as nurses and worked at USO. And I had colleagues north and south of me. I was right in the middle. And I covered an area which was very widespread. It covered about 48% of the landmass of South Vietnam. So I knew I would be journeying, and mostly by air, almost on a daily basis. Never in my life that I feel more needed. Never. In my itinerary, I could only visit main posts and bases every 5 to 6 weeks or so. So we worked very hard to develop and sustain lay leadership groups in places like, some of you will know the names, An Khe, Pleiku, Phan Rang, Cam Ranh Bay, Quy Nhon, Nha Trang. One thing that surprised me and delighted me was that I found people with strong Jewish backgrounds who were able to be lay leaders and to lead services and to teach. For example, Dr. L.B. Hornblass, who was the student body president at Yeshiva University, and Dr. David Barris, a dentist from Detroit, who was an excellent cantor and helped immensely. And I did want to say, especially with Rabbi Elson present today, to talk about the contribution of JWB. I felt from the beginning that I had really a strong ally and support from JWB. They supplied so many of our needs: prayer books, chumashim, kosher food for anyone who wanted to maintain observance of kashrut, was able to do that because of JWB supplying food continually. Kosher La Pesach food and incredible quantities. My goal was, one of my main goals was to provide islands of familiarity and tranquility even in the midst of this awful wartime place. In that place, no day was different from the next. There were no days off. But what we could do was to remember the days that were sacred to us, for Shabbat every week and every holiday, and no day, however modest in the Jewish calendar, was neglected. We would make something big of everything that we could. The services that we conducted, of course, were times to pray, but maybe even more importantly, to share a kosher snack and then to schmooze and to get to know one another and to share sometimes the things that were weighing on our hearts. There were special times where we were able to gather people together on Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Kippur, and Pesach. There were times where the command allowed people whose missions permitted them to be free to come and be together. And we did have hundreds of people together at those times. And I want to share very quickly a couple of experiences that I think made a difference and are remembered very fondly by me. My wife and I decided to see if we can break the fast on Yom Kippur at Cam Ranh Bay special that year. So we arranged to serve bagels and lox in Vietnam. That was something to write home about. There was a bakery in Seattle that provided as a gift bagels sent in vacuum bags. They weren't, of course, what one would find today fresh, but and we also had 50 pounds of lox delivered on a supply aircraft that came from McCord Air Force Base. A friend of ours who was a navigator carried it in the cockpit to Vietnam. So that was an incredible experience, and you can imagine the smile that it brought and a sense of home and something familiar to all those who had gathered. And at Pesach, we had kosher airline style meals, completely kosher for Passover, in great quantity. We had so many that we were able to send many of those meals back with soldiers when they had to return to their units. And I'll tell you just one humorous event on Pesach. There was a general in our compound who, of course, who was invited to the Seder. We would invite the brass to join us, and he sent a message to our office asking if we could postpone the Seder because there was a congressional delegation coming through, which he was obligated to host. We got a laugh out of that, and I think he got a mild reprimand for asking us to change the date of our Passover Seder. And I did want to tell you of one special experience on Sukkot, where we built Sukkot, the traditional booths in which to eat and to spend time and to study and even to have religious services during Sukkot in Vietnam. And in my office, the designer of of our sukkah was a sergeant, a career soldier. His name is Gunther Haas, and he is very memorable for a very special reason. He had been born in Germany, and during World War II, he, as a very young man, he was drafted, and he was a pilot of a fighter plane for the Luftwaffe. He was shot down by the Allied forces, and he spent time as a prisoner of war. He was treated so humanely by his American captors that after the war, he emigrated to the US, joined the US Army, and there he was in Vietnam. He was the office manager in my office in Nha Trang. He was also a master carpenter, and he designed and actually built, and we're going to show you a picture shortly of his what he did. And it was, I knew he cared so much for the Jewish program. I just knew that there was something deep within him that was trying to express his solidarity and perhaps do his own personal act of teshuvah for having served in the Luftwaffe. So these were just a couple of vignettes, and they're described in much more detail in my book. Of course, a lot of my work had to do with counseling in crisis. I expected that. People were there in acute situations. There were so many cases, marital crises, relationship crises of all sorts from people back home. I remember one terrible case of a married man who heard that his wife had become pregnant from another man, and had to engage and struggle with that news. Awful things like that. Of course, there were moral crises. I remember a man by the name of Charlie, Green Beret, who with a small unit was assisting a unit of Montagnard tribesmen on the border, way out in the bush in the jungles. He had killed any number of people, and he simply was having a terrible moral crisis about what he was doing, and he came to me for help. There were, of course, traumas, other kinds of traumas. One soldier who was recovering from wounds where he had been a member of a tank crew, which was, the tank was hit by an anti-tank weapon. Several of the crew members were killed instantly, and he survived. And he was struggling with both with his, to recover physically, but emotionally. And then there were so many cases of visiting the sick and wounded. And I mentioned earlier, my friend Lloyd Cantor and his wife Loretta. And I wanted, after he was wounded, I was called to his bedside, and we spent a couple of days together as the staff, the heroic staff in a place called Chulai. We're trying, at an evacuation hospital, we're trying to save his life. And he hovered between life and death. And I just wanted to share with you just an exact excerpt from a letter that I wrote to my wife at that moment. He is a miracle. He has simply inspired Lloyd, that is. He has simply inspired everyone who has seen him by his will. He can even smile and joke, and I just know he will make it. His mother sent a message to him which really cheered him up, and she should be able to see him in Japan. I feel today that were it just to be with this one man during this whole year, I did have a mission here. I've never felt so needed in all of my life. I've never felt the tragedy of this war so sharply as I have when he was lying before me. It was just awful. And I'm hoping shortly to perhaps to give a chance for him or his wife, if they wish, to say a few words. I thought I would finish my formal presentation just to read a couple more excerpts from the book. So here's one. Surely my witnessing the carnage in Vietnam on the bodies and souls of combatant and civilian alike, and on the land itself, strengthens my abhorrence of war. I try to imagine what life might have been like for those who were injured outwardly or inwardly, what possibilities were forcefully taken from them due to the war, what journeys, joys, adventures, contributions, and aspirations were thwarted. With the frightful toll of lives cut off, uncounted dreams were ended. Entire worlds in the eyes of Jewish tradition were destroyed. This price seems way too steep in a war that was immoral. I am not a pacifist when there is a need to defend oneself from harm, yet this was a war that should have been avoided. And finally, one more passage. We are still in recovery from the tragic period of the war in Vietnam. I know that some wounds linger for a lifetime, outer and less visible injuries too. Yet, given the conditions of that war, I was privileged to know men and women who found ingenious ways to cope. They always counted the days until their names were called to board a flight for home. But many made the days bearable by supporting one another, by doing acts of kindness for the Vietnamese people around them, by using their skills to heal and to save lives, such as Lloyd's, and by allowing their Jewish heritage to bring comfort with something as small as an ethnic morsel that did more than nourish the body, or as large as entering a sacred time when time around them was empty and painful. Jewish life seemed to provide a lifeline, a reminder of normality. We were strengthened by the basic values and practices of our faith while we were so far from home. So, friends, I conspired with Mike to conclude my part by just showing you a few images, a few pictures that we have, and maybe make a couple of comments, and then would certainly welcome questions or comments that you might want to share. So I'm going to just say a few things about these pictures. Here was, we actually had a visit from the chief of chaplains, Chaplain Sampson, who's right in the middle in the front row, third from the right. I don't know if you can pick me out, and when I was 51 years younger, I'm on the top row on the left, and all the other chaplains were Christian chaplains. There were no Muslims at that time in service or other religious leaders, but Christians and Jews. And I was, of course, the only Jew in that picture. Next, please. Yes. Here, I really want to give, again, the shout out to JWB, because I was standing there having welcomed Rabbi Maurice Lamb, who was this very distinguished rabbi and author, who I'm sure many of you know, and who made the trip. You can see he's not dressed as a soldier, still got a white shirt and tie, not the usual dress in Vietnam, but he came to visit us. He visited my area, he visited the areas north and south of me, and really gave us a boost of energy. Next, please. And here again is Rabbi Lamb, again, being welcomed by another, actually Dr. Josh Sternberg, who is also an Orthodox Jew and a doctor serving in Queen Yan, and was also a great help in our services. Next, please. Here's actually a photo of Lloyd Cantor at Rosh Hashanah before his grievous wounds. He was someone who I was attracted to immediately, a New Yorker with an upbeat spirit, friendly, gregarious, just a very special soul. Next, please. And here, actually, in a picture, is a picture of, and the man in the middle is Sergeant Gunther Haas, the one who designed and built our sukkah. This was actually when he was about to return home, and you can see he was wearing a medal that he received, and I'm to his right, and to his left was the Protestant chaplain, who was basically the head chaplain in our office. Next, please. And here we are, actually, just the proof text of him, Gunther Haas without a shirt, building our sukkah. And in the distance, I just want to point out, is Ed Finkelstein. Ed, who I know is on this call too. Ed was my assistant and my absolute right hand in everything that I did. We worked together for, I think we overlapped for 7 or 8 months. And he was absolutely instrumental for anything that I could accomplish. Next, please. And here again is the sukkah, and actually the other young man who's there was the Catholic chaplain's assistant. We all worked together, and I might just add here that in military service, in my experience, something that was absolutely exemplary and inspiring to me was the way that we worked together hand in hand. I could not have operated without the help of my fellow chaplains in every unit who absolutely helped me find the Jews who were present in their units. We worked together on every project. And here, this sukkah was built by a former Luftwaffe veteran and Protestant, Catholic, and Jew all working together. Next, please. And here, wanted to make sure you had evidence that we did serve bagels and lox for our break the fast on Yom Kippur. I don't know if you can tell, it's a little bit of a fuzzy photo, but they are holding the bagels and lox that we served. And finally, this is just a picture of me standing next to our chapel in the Trang. You can see looks like something that you find in normal life or at any base, any military base, but here it was in Vietnam, we at our headquarters in the Trang. And finally, too, here is a picture of, obviously taken much more recently, of my wife and I, my wife Lori, and Lloyd and Loretta Cantor, taken at their home near Tucson, Arizona. We've been blessed with a friendship all these 51 years now or so, and we treasure our friendship. And here's one final picture of Lloyd and me together. It's just amazing how much one can accomplish with resilience and determination. Lloyd and Loretta just celebrated recently, last October, their 50th wedding anniversary, and they've made a really good life together. Thank God. Thank you. I think that's it. That is, yes. So those are pictures. Just to give you a glimpse, most of those pictures actually appear in the book as well. So thank you so much for your attention. I would be very happy to address any questions or comments that you might have.
Let's get to some of the ones that are in the Q&A. Bruce Waxman asked early on, Rabbi, do you know who was rabbi in Tucor in 1968 before you got there?
I don't. Actually, in 68, I think in North, actually, and I think he's on the line, is Rabbi Sheldon Kirsch, who is an old friend of mine from our seminary days. And he was in Da Nang, so north of where I served. Oh, good. Sheldon was there in 67, 68.
I don't know who followed me down south. I might have been Gary Rosenberg, although he might have been contemporary with me. But very wonderful presentation, Rabbi Lewis. It's good to see you after many, many years and to hear your presentation. And you brought back quite a few memories of my own year in Vietnam with the Marines. Interestingly, I did not have too many Jewish Marines among my community in the north of Vietnam, but I had a large contingent of doctors and dentists and a few lawyers who were essentially drafted into or volunteered into the Navy, and the Navy supplied the specialists, chaplains, doctors, and dentists, and lawyers to the Marines. So my service for 2 years was with the Marines.
And one thing I might add that we, and I wonder, Sheldon, if this was true for you too, our mission was, although I was in the Army, we tried to take care of the needs of anyone in whatever military service. So frankly, be at Air Force bases and met naval personnel as well. We were all in this together.
Yes, yes.
Okay, we have a question from, this just showed up as an anonymous attendee. For a brief time, I was a Jewish chaplain's assistant in the Americal division at exactly the same time that you were there. Since he only visited us once, I don't remember the name of the rabbi assigned to I Corps. Do you remember his name?
I do. His name is Rabbi Robert Krause, and Alav Shalom. He was a very devoted chaplain. We would the three of us in country at the same time would be in frequent touch, and we would be together in person whenever we could too. But he was the one who served in the North.
This is another one that's showing up as anonymous. You've answered this already. Was the man you described who lost his limbs named Lloyd? I helped care for him. So we have somebody on that thinks they helped care for Lloyd Cantor. So.
Oh my! I'm so pleased that have someone participate like that. And I'm sure Lloyd would want to know who that is too.
Rabbi Kirscher, we just heard from. Thank you, Rabbi Lewis, for a beautiful presentation. As you know, I also served as a chaplain in the Navy, and I too spent a year in Vietnam, mainly in Da Nang with the Marines. In 1967, our base was attacked at the beginning of the Tet Offensive. Ever since, I always tell people that in Vietnam, I learned that Tet is not just the 9th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. Here's one from D. Peter Gleichenhaus. Rabbi Lewis said the seminaries where he was educated in New York encouraged students to volunteer to serve in the armed forces, notwithstanding that they were deferred. Should those same seminaries actively encourage students, especially Reform, Conservative, and Reconstruction establishments, to volunteer to serve today?
Oh, absolutely. To me, that there was really no, if there at the time of a draft, I do not understand why clergy should be exempt from that. An individual member of the clergy of any faith still had the option to apply as a CO or to find another way to be deferred. But for us to be somehow set aside, I never really understood that, and it was uncomfortable to feel that somehow, why were we so privileged in a time of crisis? Today, of course, in a voluntary, without the draft, chaplains are still needed. The number of Jews in service is diminished, of course, but the needs are great. And maybe while the numbers are diminished, maybe the need even increases for those who are serving because they are isolated. So I would, if I were asked by a young seminary student, I would definitely urge them to consider the military.
Richard Rosenzweig asks, did you meet other chaplains of our faith in Vietnam?
Well, the three of us rabbis were in close touch. We came about the same time and went home about the same time. And we planned together. We did, for example, we collaborated on training lay leaders together. We would have a joint conference where we'd gather potential lay leaders together. We shared ideas for programming all the time, and we were in close touch.
Bruce Waxman, Rabbi, did your experience in Vietnam change you in any way theologically?
I'm not sure that there was a theological change. My faith, which taught me about hope and enabled me to feel that we could work together for a better world, it really didn't change. I think what did change for me was a couple of things. One is my obsession with peacemaking, my sense that war should be avoided at all costs. I mean, this was a terrible war, but war, I don't think there are winners in war. And having witnessed the price of war close firsthand, both among the military and in the civilian population, it just made me want to devote my life as much as I could to efforts at peacemaking. And also, I think having been with people in times of acute need, whether physical or emotional, I think it helped me become a better rabbi in terms of serving others at those moments, not avoiding moments like that, trying to be with people more fully in their times of need. But theologically, my faith wasn't moved. I mean, I'm aware that we humans, we can make huge mistakes. It's not God's will that we make those mistakes, but we can do teshuvah and we can become better. Thank you for that question.
One from Judy Jaffe. Tell me again when you were there and for how long. My husband was in Nha Trang and also Saigon in 1968-69. Unfortunately, he died 8 years from the effects of Agent Orange.
Oh,
So
I arrived later. I arrived in June of 1970 and left in June of 1971. So we didn't overlap. I know Agent Orange. Agent Orange. Sounds like a terrible tragedy, and I'm so sorry to hear about this. But I think that to this day, the effects of Agent Orange are felt in ways and linger perhaps among the Vietnamese and among those who serve there.
Gordon Fuller. Hi, Shelley. These days, there's a lot of attention paid to the power differences between clergy and congregants/constituents. You talk of your close friendships you still have with soldiers that were your constituents in Vietnam. How does the chaplaincy or war environment change those power dynamics, if at all?
Actually, I worked hard to make sure that that it's my own personal inclination, but that there was a leveling of difference. I was a captain. Others, there were others who had the same rank as I or higher, and those who were enlisted people and didn't have theoretically as high rank. We made no distinctions. We tried to certainly, in the military, there is this hierarchy, and maybe there's a kind of stiffness and distance, that's imposed sometimes in the presence of someone of a higher rank or a lower rank. I think when we gathered together for Shabbat or holidays, we were in uniform and the ranks were visible, but I think we did everything possible to make sure that didn't matter in the way that we related to each other. So whether we succeeded or not, I can't guarantee that, but we really tried hard to do that. I think that was the feeling that we had. We're all in this together. And if I could do something to help, I wanted to help, but I tried hard not to have a sense of power that would intimidate others.
This is from Bruce Feldstein. I don't have a question, rather a deep public appreciation to share. Your service then and these reflections now inspire all our work as Jewish chaplains in military, hospitals, among other settings. I am personally deeply grateful for you as my rabbi, teacher, colleague, and friend. From Chaplain Bruce Feldstein.
Well, Bruce, I knew you would be aboard, and you are. You've been a huge support for me and for all these years, and you served, and you're the past president of the National Organization of Jewish Chaplains too. So thank you for your service, your continual service every day.
Another comment from the anonymous attendee that commented earlier. One day I went to visit Lloyd at the evac hospital and he'd been transferred after all these years. It is so wonderful to finally know that he survived and thrived.
Oh. Well, it's so good that we can bring good news, even belatedly, like this. Yes.
Julie Nash, do you have any comments about the drug use of soldiers that you canceled in Vietnam? You do write about this in the book.
I do. I think soldiers were so vulnerable because either their loneliness, their dislocation, their moral quandaries about the war, and maybe it's true in every wartime where people are vulnerable, Jewish soldiers or any soldier. So we as chaplains, that was a continual area of concern and teaching. There were attempts, maybe they were far from successful, to try and educate troops about the dangers of drugs. You couldn't take a step, even in the headquarters compound, without seeing some of the paraphernalia of drugs, and they were readily available. I think honestly, that was, and I did. I think among the Jewish personnel, the incidence was perhaps less than soldiers in general, but there were incidents and people who went through rehab and were hospitalized. Yes, it was a continual subject of concern among the chaplains, and we did everything we could to counsel people. I might add too that when I think of it, about these vulnerabilities, drugs was one area. I think promiscuity, the ready availability of prostitutes in Vietnam was another, and there was so many cases of sexually transmitted diseases. I think these also were these casualties of war, of being in a war zone in general, and being in this particular war, where you have this extra layer of resistance to the war held within, and uncertainty that one was doing any good or maybe doing harm. I think all of these contributed to vulnerabilities, but the casualties were very high.
Let's see. Here's a comment from Gary Siegel. First of all, thank you for your service in Vietnam. I was on Advisor Team 38 in the Central Highlands and had the pleasure of attending Passover in Nha Trang in 1969. What a wonderful service, and what a pleasure to be with fellow Jews. Again, thank you. Rabbi Elson, not a question, but an immense debt of gratitude to all rabbis who have served and continue to serve now. Rabbi Lewis is a giant on whose shoulders current military chaplains stand.
Thank you. You're more than kind. Just trying to do my job.
Alan Mendelson, as a Vietnam veteran, have you had a chance to go on an honor flight to Washington, D.C. yet?
No, I have not.
Here's one from Harvey Weiner. How did you or the military communicate the availability of Jewish services in Vietnam? I was in MACV in the southern Mekong Delta, roughly when you were there, May 1969 to May 1970, never heard about Jewish services. I wonder if I did know whether I would have left the boonies in my small unit, but I never had to face that issue.
Communication was of course a difficulty. We didn't have all the tools that we have today. We did our best through lay leadership programs in every area to spread the word of what we were doing, to have the visits of the rabbi. Then there was a rabbi in his offices in Saigon who would certainly cover the Mekong Delta too. And I'm sure he tried, this is Rabbi Fred Wenger in my time. I'm sure he tried his best to make his presence known and the activities available, but it was difficult. I think I mentioned earlier, we depended a lot on Christian chaplains too, to help point out the Jewish personnel in their units, so that when the rabbis did come by, that they could approach them. That was invaluable, but it was imperfect at best. We tried our best. There were, at special times like the high holidays and Passover, through command channels, the word was supposed to have gone out about gathering for services and being relieved from one's mission for a few days to attend. How successful that was, I don't know. I'm sure it was imperfect.
Question from Lori Burdak Miller. I have done research on World War II chaplains of all faiths. Have you ever talked to anyone from that time period to compare notes of what you all did for the service members? Thank you for giving service members peace of soul and mind. Did you ever talk to any World War II chaplains?
I haven't. I've actually read, not personally, I've read with great interest the memoirs of those who came before me. And when I hear of another one, I'm always eager to get my hands on it. But no, I don't. I haven't had any personal contact with chaplains from that war.
And here's a comment from Lloyd Cantor, not a question, but a public thank you for coming to me and staying with me. You helped me survive. Thank you for your friendship then and now. And do you want to try to call upon Lloyd? Lloyd, do you want to?
Yes, Lloyd and Loretta, would you like to say a few words? It would be welcome if you feel up to it. These are really special people. I would love for everyone on this call to get there. Lloyd and Laura, I see you're muted at the moment.
And Lloyd had also asked about the anonymous attendee, if we could get his name. I'm not sure why those questions show up anonymous, but if you can send me a message either through the chat or send me an email in response to the notifications you got for this event, let me know, and hopefully we can share your name and connect you.
Yes.
Are we unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. It's a great presentation, Rabbi.
Yeah.
I think I'll read the book again.
Oh, you are stars in the book. Yes, I actually one of the joys of looking forward to this event was to try and introduce you. I know we can't actually see your image on screen, but I just want everyone to know you because there's no one like you.
Yeah. And thanks again for everything you did for me. I really appreciate it. I know it helped me be here now.
Well, thank you.
And as you know, I heard someone ask before if there was another chaplain there, and I was told when I got into the hospital there was, but I demanded to see you. So the Army got you for me, and I'm grateful to them too.
Yes. So Lloyd was in the hospital in July, which in the area north of me. But I got word right away, and I too am very grateful because we had a friendship that preceded his injuries, and I'm so grateful that through channels the Army reached out and found me, and because I wanted to be with you at that time.
Well, I knew you from the 4th Division when I was in the 4th Division, and then when they were redeployed, I was sent up north. So when I got wounded, I wanted you.
Well, as I said, it was this experience with you, being with you, which in those couple of days, really, when we were together until you were stabilized and ready to be medevac to Japan, that made me feel this was totally worthwhile for me to be here at that time. So thank you.
Well, it was very worthwhile for me, and thank you.
I think we're going to try to bring Rabbi Kirsch back up to comment on the 1968 Seder. Rabbi Kirsch, hopefully you got that notification to get you on here. Yeah, here we go.
How about this? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
Yeah, you you do a lot of things that you didn't learn at seminary. And when I was getting ready for the Seder, we were able to, courtesy of the JWB, we were able to obtain kosher meals, which were flown into the Da Nang airfield. And the question was, we had no idea how many people would be at the Seder. We had no idea, we had to work out, how are we going to get these kosher meals heated up? And it happened that I knew the food services officer for headquarters 3rd Marine Amphibious Base, where we were based. And he had, through him, we were able to put the meals in the freezer near the Marine bakery, which was the other side of Da Nang. And as the Marines came in and we were getting closer and closer to our count, by the time I was able to start the Seder, we could call in and they started heating up the meals, still wrapped in kosher. And then they were put in a truck and brought to the USO building where we had our Seder. We actually had about 200, mainly Marines, at our Seder. And the way they got there was I sent out, and I don't know how I communicated, but I sent out mailing to every chaplain, no matter what his faith was, telling them about the Seder and asking if they could facilitate their troops in I-Corps to get to our Seder. And they did. One of them actually wrote to me, his name is escaping me, but he had a very Arab name. He was an Arab Christian chaplain who told me that that his father had left Israel, or left Palestine, I guess it was at that time, during the 1948 war, and then moved eventually to East Jerusalem, which was captured by Israel in the 1967 war, and he was now living in Israel. After I left Vietnam and got a pulpit back here in Burbank, my first summer, I went to Israel with my wife, and we visited Mr. Habibi, that's his name. The chaplain was Samir Habibi. And very interesting and wonderful things happened. But I will not forget the Seder, because as a chaplain, as an officer, I was an 03 like you, Rabbi Lewis. As an officer, I could give orders, and we never had a more orderly Seder in all of my life than when I said to a Marine who's walking in, this is what I want you to do, and this is what I want you to do. And tables were set, chairs were put in place, tableware was that. So it was quite a interesting experience.
Were some privileges of rank, weren't there?
Yeah, I used it.
Yes, yes, thank you. It's so
Thank you,
valuable.
Thank you, Rabbi Kirsch. So I guess we're almost out of time. I just want to say we have the book Letters Home in our museum store, and people can also find it in whatever the big online booksellers. They should all have it available. So with that, Rabbi Lewis, any final words?
Well, I'm just so grateful for this opportunity, and it does seem really like it's been totally therapeutic to have this this fund of memories, finally being able to be to come to light and to be shared with all of you. And I hope that what we learned from that war will help guide us to avoid such terrible war experiences in the future. But anyway, thank you. I'm just grateful for this opportunity.
Thank you for being here. Thanks to everybody for being on, and hopefully we'll see you for the next one. And we will send out a follow-up email with information on the book to everyone who registered and more information about Rabbi Lewis's story. Thanks to everyone for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike.